Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we will be analyzing the important news appearing in the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 11th July 2020. The topics to be discussed today are reflected on your screen and the time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So let's start. Appears as the lead article on page number 6 and it is with respect to Fiscal Council and will be an important part from the perspective of GS paper 3 under the category of Indian economy. Now before we talk about the Fiscal Council, let us first understand the background as to why the discussion about Fiscal Council has again come to the fore. Now the context set in by the author is that following the COVID-19 pandemic, the government needs to revive the Indian economy. And to revive the Indian economy, the government needs to borrow more amount of money in order to provide some kind of fiscal stimulus in the economy. However, this increased borrowing by the government will then in turn lead to fiscal deficit and high public debt. And this high fiscal deficit and high public debt then can have an adverse impact on the medium-term GDP growth rates of Indian economy. And not just impacting India's medium-term GDP growth, this high fiscal deficit and public debt will also downgrade India's sovereign credit rating. Hence, due to all such fears, the government has restrained itself from announcing a higher fiscal stimulus measure. However, to solve this problem, a lot of economists have pointed out that the government need not worry about the problem of fiscal stimulus causing a high fiscal deficit and public debt, because the strong fiscal stimulus measures should be accompanied by strong fiscal consolidation roadmap after the recovery of the economy. And this strong fiscal consolidation roadmap will then ensure that this high fiscal deficit and high public debt do not have an adverse impact on the Indian economy. Therefore, in the background of this discussion of whether to have higher fiscal stimulus or not, economists have pointed out that one of the best ways to ensure such a fiscal consolidation post the economic recovery is by setting up a fiscal council. Now, as you must be knowing, the general budget of the government is based upon the forecasts related to the revenue collection and the expenditure of the government for the upcoming financial year. Now, normally it is seen that the government comes out with ambitious targets related to fiscal parameters such as tax collection, reduction in fiscal deficit, etc. However, maximum of the time the government fails to meet these targets, wherein there is a wide margin between the budget forecast and the actual targets met by the government. Therefore, it is required that the government sets realistic fiscal targets. Furthermore, in recent years, the government has resorted to what is known as off-budget financing in order to reduce its expenditure and to contain its fiscal deficit. Now, off-budget financing has been explained beautifully by Baswa sir in the DNS dated 17th June 2020. You can refer to this DNS for more information on off-budget financing. But to very briefly tell you, off-budget financing is that the government doesn't borrow directly from the market, but what the government does is that the government tells the various public sector undertakings to borrow money. So the government, rather than directly borrowing money and putting into that sector, what the government will do is that the government will ask the public sector undertaking related to that sector to issue bonds. And the government of India will then provide the guarantee on those bonds. Now, though directly this off-budget financing does not lead to increase in the fiscal deficit of the government, however, due to the fact that the government of India has taken the guarantee of the bonds issued by various public sector undertakings, it is in a way is a future responsibility or obligation for the government, because it is the government who would then have to pay money if the PSUs default. Hence, it is in this regard that the Comptroller and Auditor General of India has raised concern with respect to off-budget financing, since CAG says that off-budget financing understates the government's fiscal deficit and also reduces the government's accountability to the parliament. Now, this Fiscal Council is nothing but an independent and non-partisan agency which is set up to publicly assess the government's fiscal performance against the government's stated objective and targets. Hence, it is the Fiscal Council's responsibility to assess where the government is able to meet its fiscal targets and objectives or not. Moreover, these fiscal councils serve both ex ante and ex post functions. Ex ante literally means based on forecast rather than the actual result. So, the Fiscal Council will review the government's forecast as well as the government's assumptions related to tax collection, fiscal deficit, GDP growth, etc. And this is an ex ante function where the Fiscal Council is reviewing the government's forecast and assumptions only. An ex post function obviously means that the council will monitor government's fiscal performance, including government's adherence to fiscal rules. Furthermore, this Fiscal Council will also produce independent forecasts related to GDP growth, tax buoyancy, inflation rate, etc. Then this Fiscal Council will also be responsible to analyze the long-term sustainability of public finances. Hence, these are certain key functions which will be performed by the Fiscal Council. Now, as far as the international experience with Fiscal Council is concerned, in recent years, an increasing number of advanced and some emerging economies are using independent fiscal councils in order to enhance the credibility of their fiscal rules. In fact, international experience suggests that Fiscal Council can improve fiscal outcomes as well as the accuracy related to government's forecast of various fiscal parameters. Example of certain international Fiscal Council is that United Kingdom created an Office of Budget Responsibility in 2010 and then granted it a statutory status in 2011. And this Office of Budget Responsibility provides an independent analysis of countries' public finances. Then on the similar lines in USA, we have the Congressional Budget Office that supports the budget making process by providing independent analysis of budgetary and economic issues. And in fact, IMF has said that almost 50 countries across the world have a body similar to a Fiscal Council. Now, as far as the idea of a Fiscal Council in India is concerned, keeping in view the best international practices, the FRBM Review Committee, which was headed by N.K. Singh, as well as the D.K. Srivastava Committee on Fiscal Statistics, have proposed to set up an independent Fiscal Council in India. Now, this N.K. Singh Committee has recommended that this Fiscal Council should be set up as an autonomous body working under the aegis of Ministry of Finances, Department of Economic Affairs. Furthermore, it also recommended that it should comprise of a chairperson as well as 2 other members who are to be appointed by the central government. And the persons who shall be appointed to this Fiscal Council should have significant experience in public finance, economics or public affairs. Moving ahead, as far as the role of Fiscal Council in India is concerned, the foremost role of Fiscal Council in India will be that of Fiscal Data Coordinator. Now, as a Fiscal Data Coordinator, the Fiscal Council will have the responsibility of compiling and collating the various center, state and local government fiscal data and also provide individual and consolidated fiscal accounts to the government in India on a timely basis and make such data accessible to the government as well as to the public. The next function is that of the Fiscal Data Analyst. Now, as a Fiscal Data Analyst, the Fiscal Council should utilize this compiled data to provide valuable insights into the underlying fiscal trends and highlight their policy significance. The third function will be to monitor the fiscal consolidation path. Now, the central as well as the state governments follow their respective fiscal consolidation paths according to the targets set under the FRBM Act. Now, this Fiscal Council should monitor the compliance of these targets by the central and the state government, and it should then highlight deviations in these targets by publicizing quarterly and annual reports. Lastly, The Fiscal Council will also provide the role of a fiscal policy advisor. This Fiscal Council should provide guidance to the central and the state governments on appropriate fiscal policy interventions which are aimed at improving the growth and the macroeconomic stability of our economy. Lastly, let us talk about the debate whether we really require a Fiscal Council or not. Firstly, let's see the arguments in favor of a Fiscal Council. First is that Fiscal Council will provide a reliable and realistic budgetary estimates, and this will lead to strengthening of our fiscal policy. Secondly, Fiscal Council will also provide an independent and expert assessment of government's fiscal performance, and this again will aid in an informed debate in Parliament as far as government's adherence to fiscal rules and disciplines is concerned. Thirdly, it is felt that the Fiscal Council will carry out an independent and public assessment of the government's compliance with the FRBM Act, and this too will promote fiscal discipline in the governments. Fourthly, it is felt that the office of CAG will carry out the ex post budget assessment, whereas it is the Fiscal Council which will carry out the ex ante assessment by providing realistic targets and estimates to the government. And lastly, of course, the experience of various developed countries such as the UK and the US suggests that setting up of a Fiscal Council has brought transformational changes as far as fiscal discipline and better budgetary practices is concerned. On the other hand, if we talk about the arguments given against setting up of a Fiscal Council, well, to be honest, these arguments aren't really strong or well-founded in logic. Rather, I feel that these arguments are stemming out of a place of pessimism. You will see how. The first argument which the author in this article has provided against setting up of a Fiscal Council is that he says that already we had formulated the FRBM Act, and formulation of FRBM Act has not led to any kind of fiscal discipline or enhanced accountability of the government to the Parliament. Hence, it is difficult to assume that creating a Fiscal Council will also lead to strengthening of the fiscal policy. So you see, this is a very pessimistic stance the author has taken. Just because something has not worked in the past doesn't mean it is unlikely to work in the future. Secondly, he says that already number of agencies such as the NSO and the RBI are involved in giving forecast of economic indicators. Hence, setting up a Fiscal Council will only lead to duplication of efforts and will cause unnecessary statistical noise. That is, if Fiscal Council too will be set up and is giving its estimate, there will be a lot of statistics coming from the Fiscal Council, NSO, RBI, etc. And this is nothing but duplication of efforts. Thirdly, the author feels that if we set up a Fiscal Council, then the Finance Ministry will be required to use the estimates provided by the Fiscal Council. And using these estimates of Fiscal Council will then lead to dilution of Finance Ministry's accountability. Because then the Finance Ministry can always say that, look, I use the Fiscal Council's estimate. So if at all there is any kind of mismatch, then Finance Ministry will put the blame on the Fiscal Council. And the last point raised by the author is that he says that these creative government accounting practices such as the off-budget financing can very well be countered by strengthening the office of the CAG. Therefore, India doesn't require to create a new financial institution in the form of a Fiscal Council. Lastly, as far as the conclusion or the way forward is concerned, looking at the arguments and counter-arguments, it is felt that creation of Fiscal Council will indeed transform the budget-making process, making it a more strong, effective and reliable budgetary exercise. However, the author feels that rather than setting up a Fiscal Council in one go, we could start with small positive steps in that direction, and then we can eventually scale up our efforts based on the positive experience. Moreover, starting with small steps rather than one big bang reform will become an important part of our learning curve and will also help to do mid-course correction if at all it is required. As a suggestion, he says that the CAG should appoint a temporary committee a week before the budget presentation. And then this committee should have the limited mandate to scrutinize the budget, take a look at the integrity of the numbers and place a report in the public domain. Furthermore, the CAG's office should also provide secretarial and logistic support to this committee. And even the Finance Ministry, RBI, NSO and the Niti Aayog should each depute an officer to serve in this secretariat of this committee. Now, based on the discussion of this article, please try and attempt this mains practice question, which will become a part of GS paper 3. With this, let's take up our next news. Now, we have taken this article from page number 6, titled Reform with Caution. Now, in this article, the author is talking about the certain reservations and issues he has with the recently constituted Commission on Reforms in Criminal Law. However, before discussing the author's view, let me in brief tell you about the mandate of this Committee for Reforms in Criminal Law. Now, the Home Minister decided to set up this committee somewhere in December 2019, and then in May 2020, finally the committee was constituted. Now, the main agenda of this committee is to suggest reforms to overhaul the criminal law. And very recently, the committee has opened consultation on some of its mooted reforms and has been calling public opinion on certain reforms. Now, as far as the examination is concerned, this committee in particular is not important because this committee has just been constituted, and by the time you will be done with your prelims or mains, I doubt the committee will come out with its recommendation. However, the committee has certain terms of reference and now it has opened up its consultation process and is inviting certain opinions of the legal community on certain important matters. Now, it is these certain important matters which can give you an insight as to what the government thinks is important as far as the criminal law or criminal reforms in this country is concerned. Now, as far as the procedural laws are concerned, this committee is looking at reforming the provisions of the CRPC on various issues such as arrest, bail, streamlining of trial proceedings to reduce delays, introduction of better sentencing guidelines, etc. On the evidence law side, the committee is examining whether there is a need to change the Indian Evidence Act, especially the issues arising out of the requirement of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. However, what is more important from the point of view of examination is the certain amendments this committee is thinking to carry out in the Indian Penal Code. And it is here that the committee has posed certain important questions related to sedition under Article 127A of the IPC. The question whether insult to the national flag or the emblems or the Constitution of India should be constituted as an offence. Then the question whether mob lynching and honor killing should be constituted as a separate offence. Then there are certain other questions such as whether the sexual offences should be made gender neutral. Then the committee is also seeking expert recommendations on whether to decriminalize euthanasia or not. So you see, all these topics become important from the perspective of your examination. Now, as far as GS is concerned, you do not need to delve so much into the legal aspect of these topics. However, these topics are such that they can be asked in both GS paper 1 as well as in GS paper 2. So therefore, you should have prepared notes on these topics. Now, after this committee was constituted, almost 69 members of the legal community, including retired judges and advocates, have signed a letter and sent it to the government regarding their reservation as far as the diversity of the members on this committee is concerned. Hence, it is in this context that the author is talking about the various issues or apprehensions he has with this committee on reforms in criminal law. Now, it is not the first time that a committee on reforms in criminal law has been constituted. Earlier also, we had several committees, out of which the very noted ones were the Malamuth Committee as well as the Justice Verma Committee. Now, the author says that though he agrees that the current laws which govern crime investigation and trial do require a meaningful reform, however, there are certain doubts or reservations with respect to this committee in particular. The first issue is regarding the time frame given to this committee and the consultations that it is taking into consideration. Now, earlier also a lot of attempts have been made to reform the criminal law. However, such a comprehensive reform requires very careful consideration as well as wide consultations. And it is this aspect which seems to be missing in this committee, as this committee has been given a very short time frame to come out with its recommendation. Hence, the author feels that the committee should have been given a lot more time so that it could have better considered and deliberated upon the issue. Further, the author says that this committee has begun its work in midst of a pandemic, and this pandemic isn't an idle time to call in for concrete consultations, as a lot of activists and lawyers may not be in the best of position to give their legal opinions at such a difficult time. The second issue is that the author says that this panel's mandate is very broad, vague, and hence open to interpretations. Now, this panel's mandate is, and I quote, to recommend reforms in the criminal laws of the country in a principled, effective, and efficient manner, which ensures the safety and security of the individual, the community, and the nation, and which prioritizes the constitutional values of justice, dignity, and the inherent worth of the individual. So the author feels that, such wording are too broad and too vague. And what happens with such a broad and vague mandate is that in the process of bringing in reforms, the most essential or pressing issues are often overlooked, because it is very obvious that if a certain committee has been given XYZ mandate, then that committee very well will focus on that particular mandate only. However, the entire criminal law is an ocean. It has procedural laws such as CRPC evidence, it has substantive laws such as IPC. Hence, asking a committee to overhaul the entire criminal law, that too without specifying the areas on which to focus, of course will lead to problems. Furthermore, the author is of the opinion that the Law Commission would have been in a better position to deal with this task and suggest reforms in the criminal law. Last but not the least, the third issue is of lack of diversity as far as the members of this committee are concerned in terms of both their social identity as well as their professional background and experience. Furthermore, this committee is an all-male committee. So even a lot of women lawyers have voiced their disappointment at this being an all-male committee. Lastly, as a way forward, the author is suggesting that if at all criminal law is to be reformed, there should be a genuine attempt to reach a much wider consensus and consultation. And the reforms should focus more on the ways to speed up trials, protect witnesses, address the grievances of the victims, improve the investigative mechanism, and most importantly, eliminate torture. Therefore, the government should have pinpointed the particular aspects or the points on which the committee should focus. Secondly, he feels that this committee should not set an example wherein we start a trend of hasty reforms where comprehensive changes are sought to be made within a very short time frame, and that too based on limited public input. Lastly, he feels that any kind of reform is best achieved through a much more cautious and inclusive approach. Therefore, female members should be included in this committee, and the members of this committee should be drawn in from a much more diverse professional pool of people. That's all for this article. Let's take up our next news. This news appears on page number 2, titled "Right to Education is More Than a Right." Now, recently, former Chief Justice of India, Justice Deepak Mishra, while addressing a webinar, has stated that development of scientific temperament and spirit of inquiry by education is important, and right to education is more than a right. Hence, in this regard today, we will be talking about right to education, more so from the perspective of the prelims. Now, let us first begin by talking about the constitutional background of right to education. Now, originally, Part 4 of the Indian Constitution, which deals with the directive principle of state policy, under Article 45 provided that the state shall endeavour to provide free and compulsory education to children until they complete 14 years of age. However, since this was a directive principle of state policy, it was not enforceable in law. Then in the year 1993, Supreme Court of India, in its landmark judgment of Unni Krishnan JP versus the state of Andhra Pradesh, held that education is a fundamental right flowing from Article 21, because a person cannot lead a dignified life and enjoy his personal liberty until and unless he is educated. Then in the year 1999, the Tapas Majumdar Committee recommended that right to education should be inserted as a separate right under the fundamental rights in the form of Article 21A. And finally, in the year 2002, the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2002 was enacted. This act added Article 21A, which made right to education a fundamental right for children between the age of 16 to 14 years. It also added another subclause under Article 51A. Article 51A basically casts a duty upon the parents to send their children to school. And thirdly, this amendment changed Article 45. So earlier, Article 45 was dealing that the state should provide free and compulsory education until 14 years of age. But now, since this DPSP under Article 45 got converted into a fundamental right under Article 21A, so now the government said that Article 45 will read that the state shall now endeavour to provide early childhood care and education for all children until they complete the age of 6 years. However, please note that this new Article 45 hasn't yet been notified. So in the Constitution's bare act, you will still find the old wording of Article 45. Now this 86th Amendment Act also provided for a follow-up legislation which was enacted in the form of Right to Education Act of 2009. Now as far as the important features of the RTE Act is concerned, this act provides for the right of children to free and compulsory elementary education in a neighborhood school. Elementary education means education from 1st to 8th class, and medium of instruction shall be the children's mother tongue. Now here, when we say free, we mean that no child shall be liable to pay any kind of fee or charge or expenses which may prevent him or her from pursuing and completing elementary education. Then the word compulsory here means that an obligation or duty has been cast upon the appropriate government to provide this free elementary education, and also to ensure that children within the age group of 16 to 14 years are compulsorily admitted in the school, they attend the school, and then finally complete their elementary education also. Hence, it is not just that the state has to provide free education, state has to ensure that a child completes his elementary education. And this has been cast as a duty upon the appropriate state government. Then this act lays down norms and standards related to pupil-teacher ratio, buildings, infrastructure, school working days, teacher working hours, etc. This act also provides 25% of reservation for the disadvantaged section, which include the ST/SC, socially backward, and which includes the differently abled people as well. Please remember that the financial responsibility of providing funds for imparting this free and compulsory elementary education is shared by both the state and the central government. So right to education is just not the responsibility of either the state government or the center. Both the center and the state share the financial responsibility. Now this act also prohibits the deployment of teachers for any non-education work other than the census exercise, elections to the local authority, state legislature, parliament, and disaster relief. Another prominent feature of this Right to Education Act of 2019 was that it had a no detention policy. That is to say, even if a child could not clear the examinations, he was promoted to the next class. However, the 2019 amendment to the Right to Education Act has now removed this no detention policy. So these are the most important features of Right to Education Act. Some other features as well have been added in the PDF. You can give it a look. With this, let's take up our next news. This next news appears as an article on page number 6 titled "In the Name of Cooperative Federalism." Now, as much as the title of this article is very captivating, however, this article has been written by a Trinamool Congress MP. So this article has a lot of political overtones and it is mostly written in the context of the state of West Bengal. Therefore, we will leave aside the political part and will talk about three important points related to the examination. So the broader theme of our discussion can be the challenges COVID-19 has posed to cooperative federalism. Now, it is a well-known fact that the COVID-19 and the present economic slowdown requires coordinated and synergetic efforts from both the central and the state governments in the spirit of cooperative federalism. Now, the state governments almost account for 2/3 of the capital expenditure in India. And therefore, these state governments need adequate amount of financial resources to tide over this economic crisis posed by COVID-19. However, according to a State Bank of India report, the collective loss of the gross state domestic product due to the pandemic is around 30 lakh crore or about 13.5% of the gross state domestic product. And this loss in the GSDP, accompanied by the decrease in the overall revenue, has severely constrained the ability of the state governments to counter the present economic slowdown. Hence, in this regard, the article is discussing as to how the revenues of the states have been adversely affected on account of number of reasons. Now, the first point is related to lower tax devolution. Now, as you must be knowing, the 14th Finance Commission had increased the share of the state governments in the central divisible pool from 32 to 42%. And this was supposed to be in line with the government's objective of financially empowering the states in the spirit of cooperative federalism. Now, even though the centre has transferred 42% of the share of the divisible pool to the states, however, in terms of absolute value, it has remained below the Finance Commission's projection. This is mainly on account of the lower absolute value of centre's divisible pool itself. Because due to COVID-19, there has been an economic slowdown. Hence, the revenue of the centre itself has reduced. So, since the revenue of the centre has reduced, in terms of the absolute value of money, what the centre was supposed to share with the states, that has also reduced. Hence, now the states are getting less money as compared to what was envisioned by the 14th Finance Commission. Because when 14th Finance Commission gave certain numbers, of course, it did not take into account a situation like COVID-19. The second problem is the delay in payment of the GST compensation. Now, when GST had to be implemented, some of the states had apprehension that introduction of GST will lead to fall in their revenue. Hence, in order to allay the fears of the state, the central government promised for compensating these states for the loss in their revenue by giving them GST compensation. Therefore, the centre promised that it will compensate any loss of revenue to the state for the first 5 years of the GST implementation if the GST revenue growth of the state is less than 14%. And the money to compensate these states was to be arranged by levying a compensation cess on various luxury and sin goods. However, due to the present economic slowdown, there has been a decrease in the GST collection, and this has led to an increase in the GST compensation. Because since the state governments are getting less revenue, of course, as the centre promised, they are now asking the central government to compensate for this loss of revenue. But since there has been a decrease in GST collection, even the central government is causing delay in payment of this compensation to the state governments. The last and the third issue is the lack of financial flexibility and autonomy. Now, as you must be knowing, under the Atmanirbhar package, the central government has increased the limit of the borrowing for a state government from 3 to 5% for the financial year 2021. And this was done in order to give state extra resources. However, this increase in the borrowing limit of the state is a conditional one, because to increase their borrowing limit, the state government first is required to bring in certain reform measures such as universalization of one nation, one ration card, ease of doing business, reform in the power sector, improvement in urban local body revenues, etc. It is in this regard that the author feels that some reforms being asked by the central government, like increasing the revenue of the local bodies or reforms in the power sector, are very unrealistic and impractical. Hence, he feels that the state government should not be forced to bring in such reform, and such reforms should not be made as a condition to increase the state's borrowing limit. Because this goes against the spirit of cooperative federalism, because in a way, we are not giving the flexibility, we are not giving the financial flexibility and autonomy to the state governments. So this is all what this article was stating. Now, honestly speaking, there is really no way forward to all of these challenges, because these challenges have arisen due to COVID-19 situation, and once the situation normalizes and the economy picks up, there definitely will be improvement as far as these 3 points are concerned. With this, let's take up our next news. Now, this news appears on page number 1, titled "Solar Energy Will Play a Big Role in Atmanirbhar Bharat." Now, the context of the news is that the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has recently inaugurated the Rewa Ultra Mega Solar Power Project in Madhya Pradesh. And almost 24% of the power generated by this Ultra Mega Solar Power Project will be used by Delhi Metro and the rest by the state of Madhya Pradesh. Hence, in this regard, let us very quickly look at some other initiatives by the Government of India to boost solar energy. The foremost of them, of course, is the National Solar Mission, where India has set the ambitious target of generating 100 gigawatt of solar power by the end of 2022. And this the government will try to do so by setting up solar parks and ultra mega solar power projects. Furthermore, to achieve this target, the government has also come out with the grid connected roof up solar program, which is being implemented through various DISCOMs, that is the electricity distributing companies. Now, at various places, it is being said that this Rewa Ultra Mega Solar Power Project is the largest in Asia. In fact, while I was searching on Google, I also came across certain articles which were saying that it is the biggest solar power plant of India. Please note, it's an incorrect information. The Bhadla Solar Park, with an installed capacity of 2,245 megawatt, is considered to be the world's largest solar park. And after this Bhadla Solar Park, we also have the Pavagada Solar Park, located in Karnataka, with an installed capacity of 2050 megawatt. Now, while I was researching on this topic, there seems to be certain mutually contradictory facts as far as the largest solar park is concerned. Because though the government is saying that this Rewa Ultra Mega Solar Power Project is largest in Asia, it is not practically possible, because this Rewa Solar Power Project has an installed capacity of 750 million watt. Whereas this Bhadla Solar Park clearly has the capacity of over 2000 million watt. Now, in addition to having the National Solar Mission, the government also has a scheme called the PM-KUSUM scheme. Now, under this scheme, the government is setting up 10,000 megawatt of grid-connected solar and other renewable energy plants on barren and uncultivable lands. So the idea is that on barren and land where cultivation is not possible, government will set up solar energy plants, and then this power can be sold to DISCOMs and income can be earned by the people. Then, as far as the off-grid areas are concerned, by off-grid we mean the areas which are not connected or which do not fall under the power grid. In all these areas, the government wants to replace the agriculture diesel pump and rather wants to provide solar agriculture pumps in its place. The advantage of this is that it will reduce the farmers' dependence on diesel, and through the solar agricultural pumps, the farmers will then be able to meet their irrigation needs. Lastly, we have the grid connected areas. So all those areas which do fall within the power grid, we are going to replace the diesel agricultural pump with the solar agricultural pump. And then we'll use the solar power to meet the irrigation needs and the excess solar power will then be sold to the discom companies to be distributed further. So this was all about this article. It is important as far as your prelims are concerned, both from the perspective of economy as well as environment. Now with this, let's take up our next news. Now let's quickly move on to the news summary. The first news summary is of an article given on page number 14 related to the China-USA spat over the Uyghur crackdown. Now, as you must be knowing, China's economic rise has led to some geopolitical friction between the US and China. And in fact, rivalry between US and China has become a paradigm of international relations over the past 2 years. There has been continuous US-China confrontations in the form of their trade war, cyber warfare, spats over coronavirus pandemic, security law in Hong Kong, interference in the Taiwan issue, visa restrictions, etc. And now US has imposed sanctions on 3 Chinese officials for their involvement in a crackdown on the Muslim minorities in Xinjiang province, which are the Uyghurs. So Uyghurs are ethnically Turkic Muslims. However, they make up to 45% of Xinjiang region's population, and the other 40% are the Han Chinese. Now China has re-established its control over the Xinjiang province after crushing the East Turkestan state. Now Xinjiang is officially designated as an autonomous region in China, just like Taiwan. Now a lot of human rights groups say that the Uyghurs, who are a Muslim minority in the Xinjiang province, are being made part of a vast brainwashing campaign and are being forced to convert into the Chinese Han. So as far as your prelims is concerned, you need to know about the Uyghurs. Please remember that they are basically Turkic Muslim. They occupy the Xinjiang province, which is considered to be an autonomous region within China. The second article is given on page number 10, and it is with respect to the delivery of Apache attack helicopters from USA. Now, in my opinion, the only thing which you need to remember as far as the prelims are concerned is what kind of aircraft we are getting from which country. So let us very quickly talk about these defense aircrafts. Now, MiG-29 is India's premier air defense fighter aircraft, and it was developed by Russia. And it is this MiG-29 which was used in Kargil war as well. Second is the light combat aircraft Tejas, and this is being designed and developed by the Aeronautical Development Agency. Will replace the MiG-21 fighter jets which we got from the Soviet Union. Third is the Sukhoi, which were jointly developed by Russia and India. And of course, last is Rafale, which was a lot in news and is being manufactured by French company Dassault Aviation. Now these are the aircrafts. As far as the helicopters are concerned, we have Dhruv, which is being developed and manufactured by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. Hence, it has been developed indigenously. Then we have Chinook, which we acquired from the USA, and the Chinook will replace the Mi-26 helicopters of the Indian Air Force. Now again, Apache helicopter. It is the most advanced multi-role heavy attack helicopter in the world, and again being developed by USA. Then we have the Seahawk, which is again developed by USA, and last we have Kamov, which has been developed by Russia. Now please remember that this list is not exhaustive. I might have missed some other helicopters or fighter aircrafts. So this is just the basic list. As and when you come across some new names of these fighter aircrafts or helicopters, you can keep adding it to the list. The third news summary is related to the article given on page number 10 titled Rajasthan Education Guidelines IRC NCPCR. So from the perspective of prelims, NCPCR becomes important. Now, NCPCR is a statutory body because it was established under the Commission for Protection of Child Rights Act of 2005. So please remember, it is not a constitutional body, it is a statutory body. And it comes under the administrative control of Ministry of Women and Child Development. Furthermore, this act under which the NCPCR was constituted also provides for national and state commissions for protection of child rights. Now, the main aim of the NCPCR is to ensure that all laws, policy programs as well as administrative mechanisms are in consonance with the child rights as enshrined in the Constitution of India as well as the UN Convention on the Rights of Child. So it was basically when India ratified the UN Convention on Rights of Child that India came out with this CPCR Act, and then the NCPCR was formulated or established. Now, under this Act, a child is defined as a person in the age group of 0 to 18 years. Now, as far as the functions of this commission are concerned, of course, the list is very huge. But as a quick revision, the first function is to examine and review the safeguard provided for children under any law and also recommend measures for their effective implementation. Second function is to present reports to the government annually regarding the working of these safeguards. Thirdly, it has the function to inquire into violation of child rights and then recommend initiation of proceedings in such a case. Then it also has to undertake and promote research in the field of child right. It has to spread literacy in child rights. Then it also has the power to inspect any juvenile custodial home or any other place of residence meant for children under the control of central or the state government. And lastly, it can inquire into complaints and also take suo motu cognizance of matters relating to deprivation and violation of child. So please remember that NCPCR does have the power of suo motu cognizance. With this, we come to an end for today's discussion. Let's take up the question for the day.